Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover the hidden secrets of history, from ancient mysteries to lost civilizations. Join us on this thrilling journey. Subscribe and dive into the unknown. The Pentagon, the heart of America's military power. A fortress of secrets, where classified documents are guarded and global strategies are forged. But what if, for 3 years during the height of the Cold War, one of its most unusual advisors wasn't from Earth at all? What if a being from another world walked its halls, met with the president, and offered humanity a future free of sickness and war, only to be rejected? This is not the plot of a science fiction movie. This is the story of Valiant Thor, the alleged alien from Venus who, according to a small but dedicated group of believers, lived and worked at the Pentagon from 1957 to 1960. It's a story that blurs the line between documented history and extraordinary myth. Was he a real extraterrestrial emissary on a mission to save humanity? Or was he simply a fantastic product of the 1950s UFO craze? Today, we unlock the case file on Valiant Thor, the Venusian advisor. Every great mystery has a beginning, a single point in time where the fabric of the ordinary is torn, revealing something extraordinary lurking just beneath. For the astonishing case of Valiant Thor, that point is not a vague anecdote from a forgotten past. Proponents of this incredible story anchor it to a precise date and a specific place. March 16, 1957, in the quiet, unassuming farmlands of Alexandria, Virginia. At the time, America was in the grip of the Cold War. The air was thick with paranoia. The skies were being watched not just for Soviet bombers but for unidentified flying objects. The UFO craze was in full swing, fueled by famous sightings like Kenneth Arnold's in 1947 and the Roswell incident. People were seeing strange lights and mysterious craft all across the country. But what allegedly happened in that Virginia field was different. This wasn't just a fleeting light in the sky. This was contact. The story begins, as so many of these accounts do, with a disturbance in the mundane. A gleaming, metallic, saucer-shaped object was seen descending from the sky. It moved with an eerie silence, none of the roar and rumble of a conventional aircraft. It settled gently into a farmer's field, the morning mist swirling around its polished hull. This was not a crash. It was a deliberate, controlled landing. Within minutes, the local police department was flooded with calls from startled residents. Officers were dispatched immediately, their minds likely racing through a checklist of possibilities. Was it a downed weather balloon? A top-secret experimental military craft from a nearby base? Or, in the most paranoid corner of their minds, was it a Soviet reconnaissance vehicle? As police units arrived and set up a perimeter, their initial training would have been for a terrestrial threat. They approached the object cautiously, weapons drawn, shouting commands into the quiet morning air. The craft itself was unlike anything they had seen. It was perfectly seamless, with no visible rivets, joints, or propulsion systems. It hummed with a low, almost subliminal energy. The officers were prepared for hostility, for espionage, for anything within the realm of their Cold War reality. They were not prepared for what happened next. A section of the metallic hull seemed to dissolve, opening a ramp with a soft, pneumatic hiss. And from the bright interior, a single being emerged. This is the moment where the story pivots from a standard UFO report into the birth of a legend. The figure who walked down that ramp was not a little green man or a monstrous creature from a B-movie. He looked, at first glance, remarkably human. He was tall, perhaps over 6 feet, with brown, wavy hair and a serene, intelligent expression. He was dressed in a one-piece, iridescent jumpsuit that shimmered like mother of pearl. He raised a hand in a universal gesture of peace, showing no fear, no aggression. But as the officers got closer, they began to notice subtle, yet deeply unsettling differences. His skin was flawless, with a slightly bronzed tint, and he appeared to have no fingerprints. The most striking feature, according to the accounts, was his hands. He reportedly had 6 fingers on each hand, a detail that immediately set him apart from any known human being. His eyes were brown, but they held a depth and wisdom that seemed ancient. He was, in every sense of the word, an emissary. He did not wait for interrogation. He spoke, and his voice was calm and resonant. His English absolutely perfect, with no discernible accent. He introduced himself to the bewildered officers with a name that sounded both regal and strangely familiar: Valiant Thor. The name itself was a puzzle. Valiant, suggesting courage and nobility. Thor, evoking the powerful Norse god of thunder. It was a name designed to convey both strength and purpose. He explained that he had deliberately chosen this location, so close to the nation's capital, because his message was intended for the leaders of the United States. This is where the second layer of the mystery unfolds: his mission and his origin. Valiant Thor claimed he was not here as a conqueror or even as a simple explorer. He was a diplomat, an emissary from a council of planets in the galaxy. His home planet, he stated, was Venus. This, even in 1957, would have raised eyebrows, but he allegedly offered an explanation that fit the scientific knowledge of the time. He described his Venus not as the hellish inferno we now know it to be, but as a planet with 2 distinct realities. The surface, he conceded, was harsh, but beneath the dense, impenetrable clouds, there was a thriving, lush, subterranean civilization, a paradise of immense spiritual and technological advancement. His people, he explained, had watched humanity for centuries. They had seen our capacity for love, for art, for great beauty. But they had also watched with growing alarm as we developed weapons of mass destruction. Our recent mastery of atomic energy, and our willingness to use it against ourselves, had sent a shockwave, not just across our planet, but into the delicate cosmic balance of our solar system. His mission, therefore, was one of urgent, benevolent intervention. He had come on behalf of the High Council, a governing body of intergalactic elders, to offer humanity a way out of the self-destructive cycle of sickness, poverty, and war. He carried with him a proposal, a roadmap to a golden age, which he was to present directly to the President of the United States. The police officers on the scene were now faced with a situation far beyond their jurisdiction, beyond anything in their training manuals. This was not a matter for local law enforcement. This was a matter of national and perhaps global security. The initial reports sent up the chain of command must have been met with a mixture of disbelief and extreme alarm. In the tense atmosphere of the Cold War, any unidentified craft landing near Washington, D.C. was a major incident. But an unidentified craft whose occupant claimed to be an alien from Venus on a diplomatic mission? That was an event without precedent. The final stage of his arrival was swift, quiet, and decisive. This was his escort to the Pentagon. The story goes that the initial confusion at the local level was quickly superseded by a higher authority. The military arrived on the scene, securing the area and imposing a complete lockdown on all information. The police officers were reportedly debriefed and sworn to absolute secrecy, their reports classified at the highest level. The landed craft, Thor's ship named Victor I, was left in the field, protected by an invisible force field that made it impervious to any attempt to move or analyze it. Valiant Thor himself was not treated as a hostile entity. He was not put in handcuffs or thrown in a holding cell. His calm demeanor, his profound intelligence, and the sheer impossibility of his presence commanded a different kind of response. He was treated as what he claimed to be, a visiting dignitary. He willingly accompanied the military officials. He was ushered into a black, unmarked government car and driven away from the Virginia farmland, leaving behind a handful of sworn-to-secrecy witnesses and a perfectly silent, impenetrable starship. His destination was the one place on Earth designed to handle secrets of this magnitude, the five-sided fortress of American military power, the Pentagon. This was not an arrest. It was an invitation. He was being taken to the nerve center of the very power structure he had come to challenge and to help. As he was driven through the gates of the most secure military building in the world, the first chapter of his alleged earthly mission closed, and a new, even more incredible chapter was about to begin. He had successfully made contact. Now he had to convince the leaders of a frightened, divided, and powerful nation that he was not a threat, but their last, best hope for survival. The alien had arrived, and he was now inside the walls of the fortress. If the story of Valiant Thor had ended in that field in Virginia, it would be a fascinating but ultimately familiar tale, one of thousands of close encounter reports that dot the landscape of UFO lore. It would be a story of a mysterious arrival and an official cover-up. But what elevates this case from a simple sighting into an enduring, almost mythic legend is what supposedly happened next. The most incredible part of the narrative is not that he landed, but that he stayed. The claims assert that Valiant Thor was not interrogated in a bunker or studied in a secret lab. Instead, he was given a status so unique, so unprecedented, that it defies all conventional logic. He was allegedly housed within the Pentagon itself, given a private, well-appointed apartment, and treated as a VIP guest of the United States government for a period of 3 full years. This was his 3-year residency, a time when, if the story is true, an alien walked the halls of power. The most sensational claim, the very cornerstone of the entire legend, is that Thor was quickly granted the audience he had requested. This wasn't a meeting with a low-level bureaucrat or a skeptical general. According to the account popularized by Dr. Frank Strange, Valiant Thor was brought face-to-face with the highest levels of American power, President Dwight D. Eisenhower and Vice President Richard Nixon. This alleged meeting would have taken place in the utmost secrecy, deep within the White House or a secure Pentagon facility, far from the prying eyes of the press and the public. Here, in this clandestine setting, Thor is said to have laid out his mission in full. He spoke not as a petitioner, but as an equal, a representative of a civilization far older and wiser than our own. He presented his analysis of Earth's condition with a calm, dispassionate clarity. He spoke of our planet as a beautiful but troubled world, a sorrowful star on the brink of self-annihilation. He detailed the immense danger posed by the escalating nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, warning that our primitive grasp of atomic energy could not only destroy our own civilization but also create cosmic disruptions that would affect our entire solar system. He explained that humanity was at a critical crossroads, a point of technological adolescence where our power had dangerously outstripped our wisdom. But his message was not one of doom. It was one of hope. He then presented Eisenhower with his gift, a comprehensive proposal for the spiritual and technological advancement of the human race. It was a plan to systematically eliminate all of the ills that plagued our society. It was, in essence, a blueprint for utopia. This wasn't a vague philosophical treatise. It was a concrete offer of advanced knowledge and technology. This leads to the second and most critical allegation of his residency: the offer and the rejection. The proposal Thor laid on the table was staggering in its scope. It allegedly included the formula for a universal cure for all forms of disease, from cancer to the common cold, effectively ending human sickness and suffering. It included the designs for a clean, limitless energy source derived from cosmic rays that would make fossil fuels obsolete and provide abundant power for everyone on the planet, ending poverty and scarcity. It offered agricultural sciences that could make any desert bloom, ending famine forever. And most importantly, it offered a plan for social and spiritual development, a way to foster global cooperation and eliminate the tribalistic mindset that leads to war. It was, in short, a complete solution to all of humanity's greatest problems. But this gift, according to the legend, came with a condition. It was an all-or-nothing deal. The technology and the spiritual guidance were intertwined and could not be separated. Humanity had to agree to dismantle its weapons of war and embrace a new way of living, based on cooperation instead of conflict. President Eisenhower, a man who had commanded the Allied forces in World War II and had seen the horrors of war firsthand, was reportedly deeply moved and intrigued by the offer. He recognized the sincerity and the immense potential of what was being presented. However, the president was not the only voice in the room. The decision was not his alone to make. The story claims that he convened a secret meeting with top military leaders, heads of intelligence agencies, and powerful captains of industry, the very men who would later form what Eisenhower himself would famously warn against as the military-industrial complex. And it was here that the plan met a wall of human fear and self-interest. The generals saw the dismantling of the military as an unthinkable act of surrender, leaving the nation vulnerable. The titans of industry saw a vision of economic apocalypse. What would happen to the massive pharmaceutical industry if all diseases were cured? What would become of the global oil and gas empires if energy became clean and virtually free? What would happen to the immense profits of the defense contractors if war became obsolete? They argued that the very structure of the global economy was built on scarcity, sickness, and conflict. Thor's utopia, they concluded, would lead to a total collapse of their power and wealth. Faced with this unified, powerful opposition, President Eisenhower, despite his own inclinations, was allegedly forced to reject the offer. Humanity, when presented with a roadmap to paradise, chose to stick with the familiar map of its own suffering. Thor, though disappointed, was not surprised. He had understood the deep-seated nature of human fear. He agreed to remain for the duration of his 3-year mission, to serve as an advisor and an observer, hoping that some of his wisdom might still take root. It was during this time that he supposedly demonstrated his unique and unexplainable abilities. This third aspect of his residency, his extraordinary power, served as constant, living proof of his otherworldly origins. He was not a prisoner, but he was under constant, subtle surveillance. Yet, he seemed to move about with an uncanny freedom. It's claimed that he could dematerialize his physical body from his locked apartment within the Pentagon and rematerialize elsewhere, even on board his ship, Victor I, which remained cloaked in its Virginia field. This ability to pass through walls left his military handlers in a state of constant bewilderment and frustration. They could not contain him. His mental abilities were even more profound. He was said to be a powerful telepath, able to read the thoughts and intentions of those around him. This made deception impossible. He knew when he was being lied to, and he understood the hidden fears and ambitions that drove the men he interacted with. His own mind was reportedly shielded from any form of psychic or technological probing. His knowledge was encyclopedic. He could discuss quantum physics with the nation's top scientists one moment, and ancient terrestrial history with historians the next, often correcting their understanding with details no human could possibly know. He spoke multiple languages fluently and seemed to have an innate understanding of human psychology, art, and philosophy. He was, in essence, a living supercomputer with a compassionate soul, a constant, walking, talking enigma in the halls of the Pentagon. Of course, a story this incredible requires some form of proof, which brings us to the fourth and most controversial element of his alleged residency, the photographic evidence. For decades, the story of Valiant Thor was just Theta's story, passed down through the words of Dr. Strange. But in later years, a handful of photographs emerged, purported to be genuine images of Thor taken during his time in Washington. One famous image shows a group of men in suits, and among them is a man with a serene expression and wavy brown hair who matches Strange's description. Another photo, allegedly taken at a gathering in a home in Alexandria, Virginia, shows a similar-looking man. Proponents claim these are authentic, leaked photos. They analyze the facial structure, the slight otherness in his eyes, as proof. Skeptics, however, are quick to dismiss them. They argue the photos are blurry, lack clear provenance, and could easily be misidentified individuals or outright fakes. There is no definitive proof tying the man in the photos to the Pentagon or to any government officials from that era. Yet, for believers, these images are precious, tantalizing glimpses of the man who came from another world and offered us the stars, only to be turned away. They are the last, fading artifacts of a failed embassy, a 3-year residency that could have changed the course of human history forever. An extraordinary story requires an origin. A legend as specific and as detailed as that of Valiant Thor with names, dates, and secret presidential meetings doesn't simply spring from the ether. It must have a source, a patient zero from which the narrative spreads. If a being from Venus truly lived in the Pentagon for 3 years, a secret of that magnitude would be the most closely guarded information in human history. It wouldn't be found in a declassified government file or a mainstream history book. It would have to emerge from the shadows, carried by someone who claimed to have broken through the veil of secrecy. To understand the case of Valiant Thor, we must turn our investigation away from the alleged events themselves and focus on the crucial question. Where did this incredible story actually come from? The entire elaborate narrative of the Venusian Advisor, as it is known today, can be traced back primarily to one single charismatic individual. This is our first and most important clue. The key witness, Dr. Frank E. Strange. Strange was not a scientist or a government insider in the traditional sense. He was a man of many hats. An evangelist, a holder of degrees in theology and psychology, and a passionate, deeply invested UFO researcher. He was a compelling speaker and a prolific author, a central figure in the UFO community during a time when it was burgeoning with incredible tales. In 1967, 7 years after Thor's alleged departure, Strange published a slim but explosive book that would forever cement the legend, Stranger at the Pentagon. This book was not presented as fiction or speculation. It was presented as a first-hand, eyewitness account. Dr. Strange made the incredible claim that he had not only learned of Valiant Thor's existence, but had personally met and befriended him. He alleged that he was one of the few human beings outside the top echelons of government who was granted access to the mysterious visitor. According to his own account, his deep faith and his work in evangelism somehow made him a trustworthy contact, a bridge between Thor's spiritual mission and the human world. He claimed to have had multiple conversations with Thor inside a secure area of the Pentagon, becoming a confidant and a scribe for the Venusians' teachings. This claim is the very foundation upon which the entire legend is built. Without Dr. Strange, the story of Valiant Thor likely would not exist in the detailed form we have it today. He is both the primary source and the central protagonist of the narrative's dissemination. But this immediately presents a critical problem for any investigator. When the person telling the story is also a central character within it, the lines between objective reporting and personal narrative become hopelessly blurred. We are forced to ask, was Dr. Strange a genuine whistleblower? A courageous man who risked everything to bring a world-changing truth to light? Or was he a masterful and charismatic storyteller? A man who perhaps believed his own tale, tapping into the zeitgeist of the era to create the ultimate UFO contact story? The answer to that question determines the fate of the entire case. To find an answer, we must look deeper into the primary evidence itself. This brings us to our second point of inquiry: the book's specific details. Stranger at the Pentagon is what gives the legend its texture and its enduring power. It's filled with the kind of specific, vivid details that make a story feel real. Strange provides the most complete physical description of Thor, from his six-fingered hands and unique physiologia single, giant lung, and a heart capable of handling immense pressure. His diet, which allegedly consisted of little more than water and occasional milk. He describes Thor's iridescent jumpsuit, which he called a garment of light, capable of deflecting bullets. The book delves deep into the content of Thor's alleged meetings with President Eisenhower. It recounts the Venusian's warnings about nuclear war and his detailed proposal for humanity's salvation. More than that, it's filled with Thor's philosophical and spiritual teachings, messages of universal love, the interconnectedness of all life, and a rejection of materialism. These teachings are a blend of Christian morals, New Age spirituality, and classic science fiction tropes. The book is not just a UFO story. It's a spiritual manual, with valiant Thor presented as a kind of cosmic Christ figure, a savior from the stars. The very richness of these details is both the story's greatest strength and its most significant weakness. For believers, the specificity is proof of its authenticity. How could someone invent such a coherent and detailed account? For skeptics, it's a red flag. The details seem almost too perfect, too neatly packaged. The blend of science fiction concepts with familiar Christian ethics feels like a deliberate construction, designed to resonate with a 1960s American audience. The story feels less like a raw, unfiltered leak of a classified secret and more like a carefully crafted parable. Of course, a single source, no matter how detailed, is not enough to sustain a conspiracy theory of this magnitude. Over the years, other voices have emerged from the fringes of the UFO and conspiracy communities, claiming to have knowledge that supports Strange's account. This is our third area of investigation, the search for corroborating voices. One of the most notable of these figures was a man named Phil Schneider. Schneider was a controversial geologist and self-proclaimed ex-government employee who became famous in the 1990s for his dark lectures on secret underground bases and human-alien conflicts. In his talks, Schneider made the astonishing claim that his own father, Captain Oscar Schneider, had been a medical officer in the U.S. Navy and had worked directly with Valiant Thor during his 3-year stay at the Pentagon. Phil Schneider alleged that his father had been part of the team that studied Thor's unusual physiology and had kept secret records and photographs of the encounter. This claim, if true, would be a bombshell. It would provide the independent, second-source verification that the story desperately needs. However, Phil Schneider's own story is fraught with controversy and tragedy. He died in 1996 under circumstances that his supporters claim were suspicious, while critics point to a history of mental health struggles. There is no official record or verifiable evidence to support his claims about his father's involvement with an alien. Like Dr. Strange's, Phil Schneider's testimony requires a leap of faith from the listener. It is another compelling story, but it remains just Theta's story, a single thread that leads back to the same essential mystery rather than providing a way out of it. Without solid human corroboration, investigators must look for circumstantial evidence, for faint echoes of the story in the official historical record. This leads to the fourth and most tantalizing clue: the Eisenhower connection. While there is no official document that mentions Valiant Thor by name, President Eisenhower's personal history is filled with intriguing connections to the UFO phenomenon. He is the only president on record who is confirmed to have authorized a secret meeting to discuss UFOs, the famous Robertson panel in 1953. Numerous unverified stories claim he had his own personal sightings, and even a secret meeting with a different group of aliens at Holloman Air Force Base. But the most compelling piece of circumstantial evidence comes from Eisenhower's own mouth. On January 17, 1961, just before leaving office, he delivered one of the most famous farewell addresses in American history. In it, he issued a stark and unexpected warning to the nation. He spoke of the rise of a new, immense power in the land, something he called the military-industrial complex. He warned that this fusion of a massive military establishment and a large arms industry was a threat to democratic processes, and that the nation must guard against it acquiring unwarranted influence. Researchers of the Valiant Thor story point to this speech as a profound piece of evidence. Where did this sudden, dire warning come from? Why would a career military man like Eisenhower issue such a sharp critique of the very system that had defined his life? The theory is that this speech was directly influenced by his encounter with Valiant Thor. It was Thor, the story goes, who first warned him about this unholy alliance of military and corporate power. It was the leaders of this very complex who had forced him to reject Thor's offer of peace. Eisenhower's farewell address, in this interpretation, was not just a political speech. It was a veiled confession, a final, cryptic warning to the American people about the real reason humanity had failed its cosmic test. It was the last, faint echo of a conversation he had with a stranger at the Pentagon. In any great mystery, after we have followed the trail of tantalizing clues and listened to the compelling testimony, we must step back. We must take a deep breath, quiet our desire to believe, and allow a different voice into the room. The voice of skepticism. This voice isn't here to spoil the fun or to dismiss the story outright. It is here to act as a necessary counterbalance, to apply the tools of logic and reason to a narrative that seems to defy both. For every believer who sees the story of Valiant Thor as a hidden chapter of our history, there is a skeptic who sees it as a masterfully constructed myth. To truly understand this case, we must give this perspective its due weight. We must deconstruct the legend and examine the powerful arguments that stand against it. The first and most formidable obstacle that the Valiant Thor story crashes against is a simple but profound one: the lack of hard evidence. In the world of investigation, whether it's a crime, a historical event, or a scientific discovery, the burden of proof lies with the one making the extraordinary claim. And the claim that a six-fingered alien from Venus lived in the Pentagon for 3 years is about as extraordinary as it gets. Yet, when we search for concrete, verifiable proof, we find a stunning and deafening silence. Consider the sheer scale of what is being alleged. A non-human entity was not just captured, but housed, fed, studied, and given access to the President of the United States. Such an event would have involved hundreds, if not thousands, of personnel. There would have been security details, medical staff, translators initially, cooks, cleaners, scientists, intelligence analysts, and a vast web of military and civilian officials. Each of these individuals would have created a paper trail: duty rosters, memos, requisition forms, scientific reports, psychological evaluations, and classified briefings. The American government, particularly the military, is a colossal bureaucracy that runs on paperwork. Yet, in the more than 60 years since these events allegedly took place, not a single one of these documents has ever surfaced. The Freedom of Information Act has been used by researchers to request files on countless sensitive subjects, from the JFK assassination to the CIA's mind control experiments. But requests for files pertaining to Valiant Thor or any ET advisor during the Eisenhower administration have yielded nothing. No official records, no declassified memos with tantalizing blacked-out sections, no deathbed confessions from high-ranking generals or White House aides. The entire story rests on the testimony of a handful of individuals from the UFO community, primarily Dr. Strange himself. For an event of this magnitude to leave no footprint whatsoever in the official record requires us to believe in a government cover-up so perfect, so absolute, and so enduring as to be a miracle in itself. Beyond the lack of documentation, we are confronted with a major scientific problem, a detail that was plausible in the 1950s but has become a critical flaw in the 21st century. This is the Venus problem. When valiant Thor allegedly arrived in 1957, Venus was still a planet of mystery. Shrouded in a thick, impenetrable blanket of clouds, its surface was invisible to our telescopes. This allowed for a great deal of romantic speculation. Scientists, astronomers, and science fiction writers could imagine almost anything beneath those clouds, vast oceans, swampy jungles, or even advanced civilizations. Valiant Thor's description of a lush, subterranean paradise was fantastic, but it was not, at the time, scientifically impossible. But science marches on. Beginning with the Soviet Venera probes in the 1960s and continuing through NASA's Magellan mission in the 1990s, we have pierced that cloudy veil. And what we have found is not a paradise. We have found a vision of hell. The surface of Venus is a crushing, toxic wasteland. The atmospheric pressure is over 90 times that of Earth's, equivalent to being nearly a kilometer deep in the ocean. The temperature is a staggering 465 degrees Celsius, or 870 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead. The clouds that Thor described as hiding a lush world are made not of water vapor, but of corrosive sulfuric acid. This presents the modern investigator with a stark choice. Either our entire scientific understanding of Venus, confirmed by decades of data from multiple space agencies, is completely wrong, or the central claim of valiant Thor's origin is false. Some proponents of the story try to reconcile this by suggesting he came from a different dimension or a spiritual plane of Venus, but this is a later addition, a way to patch a hole in the original narrative. The original story, as told by Strange, described a physical being from a physical place. A place that we now know is utterly inhospitable to any form of life as we understand it. So, if the story lacks physical evidence and contradicts scientific fact, where might it have come from? To answer that, the skeptic suggests we look not to the stars, but to the cultural environment on Earth at the time. This is the crucial importance of understanding the context of the 1950s. The decade following World War II was not just the dawn of the Cold War. It was the golden age of a very specific type of UFO belief system, the contactee movement. Unlike later abduction stories, which were often terrifying and traumatic, the contactee narratives of the 50s were almost always positive and utopian. Charismatic individuals, the most famous being George Adamski, claimed to be in regular, friendly contact with wise and benevolent space brothers. These beings were almost always described as perfectly beautiful, human-looking aliens who came from Venus, Mars, and Saturn. They wore shimmering one-piece jumpsuits, traveled in gleaming silver saucers, and brought messages of peace, love, and warnings about the dangers of nuclear weapons. They were, in essence, space angels arriving to save humanity from itself. When viewed through this historical lens, the story of Valiant Thor looks less like a unique, standalone event and more like the most sophisticated and well-developed iteration of the classic contactee myth. He fits the pattern perfectly. The human-like appearance, the Venusian origin, the shimmering suit, the peaceful message, the warning against atomic bombs. The only major difference is that instead of meeting a lone man in the desert like Adamski did, Thor's story places him directly in the corridors of power. It takes the standard contactee formula and elevates it, giving it a political, conspiratorial edge that makes it far more compelling and resilient. The story isn't just about a friendly alien. It's about our own leaders rejecting salvation. This makes it a much more powerful and enduring myth. Ultimately, the skeptical viewpoint invites us to apply a fundamental tool of logical reasoning, a principle known as Occam's razor. The principle, in its simplest form, states that when faced with competing explanations for the same phenomenon, the one that makes the fewest new assumptions is usually the correct one. In this case, we have two competing explanations for the story of Valiant Thor. Explanation A assumes that a physical alien from a scientifically impossible version of Venus landed on Earth, that he was taken to the Pentagon and lived there for 3 years, that he met with the president and offered world-changing technology, that our leaders rejected this offer, and that this entire monumental event, involving thousands of people, was so perfectly covered up that not a single piece of verifiable evidence has leaked in over 60 years. This explanation requires us to make a massive number of extraordinary assumptions about alien life, government secrecy, and human behavior. Explanation B, the skeptical explanation, assumes something much simpler, that a creative, charismatic author named Dr. Frank Strange, living in the midst of a massive cultural obsession with UFOs and benevolent Venusians, crafted a compelling story. He blended the popular contactee tropes of his day with real-world political anxieties, the Cold War, the fear of nuclear war, and a growing distrust of government to create a powerful, modern parable. He wrote a book that gave people a sense of hope and a compelling villain, the military-industrial complex. And this story took on a life of its own, becoming a cherished piece of modern folklore. Occam's razor would suggest that explanation B, which requires no new assumptions about physics, biology, or the absolute perfection of government conspiracies, is the far more probable one. It does not necessarily mean that Dr. Strange was a deliberate fraud. He may have believed his story completely. But from a purely logical standpoint, the theory that Valiant Thor is a product of human culture, not extraterrestrial contact, remains the most simple and therefore the most likely explanation. So we find ourselves at a crossroads. We have followed the incredible story of Valiant Thor's arrival and his alleged 3-year residency in the heart of American power. We have examined the source of the tale, rooted in the testimony of Dr. Frank Strange, and we have weighed the powerful, logical arguments of the skeptics. We are left with two starkly different portraits, one of a genuine, failed extraterrestrial embassy, and another of a masterful modern myth. It is tempting to demand a final verdict, to declare the case definitively true or definitively false. But perhaps the most fascinating and enduring aspect of the Valiant Thor legend is not whether it's factually correct. It's the question of why. Why, after more than half a century, does this particular story continue to resonate so deeply? What is its enduring legacy? To answer that, we must look beyond the evidence and into what the story represents on a deeper cultural level. First and foremost, the legend of Valiant Thor persists because it is a powerful symbol of hope. To understand its appeal, we must transport ourselves back to the chilling atmosphere of the late 1950s and early 1960s. This was a time of unprecedented anxiety. School children were practicing duck and cover drills, hiding under their desks in a futile exercise against nuclear annihilation. Families were building fallout shelters in their backyards. The two global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were locked in a terrifying arms race, stockpiling enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world many times over. The future felt fragile, uncertain, and shadowed by the constant threat of a mushroom cloud. Into this atmosphere of profound fear, the story of Valiant Thor arrived like a cool drink of water in a desert. He was not a hostile invader or a conquering monster. He was a figure of immense wisdom, calm, and compassion. He represented a future that was not only possible, but was being actively offered to us. The idea that a benevolent, advanced civilization was watching over us, concerned for our well-being, was a potent antidote to the feeling of being alone and adrift in a dangerous universe. He offered a cure for all our diseases, an end to our self-inflicted poverty, and most importantly, a path away from the nuclear brink. The story of valiant Thor is the ultimate what-if of the Cold War. It is the dream of a better path, a road not taken. It continues to fascinate us because it embodies one of our most profound collective hopes, that we are not alone, and that a wiser, kinder way of life is possible. But the story is not just a comforting fantasy. It is also, at its very core, a sharp and incisive critique of power. This is perhaps why it has had such a long life, especially within conspiracy culture. The legend does not end with humanity joyfully accepting the gift from the stars. It ends in failure, and the reason for that failure is profoundly important. Salvation is rejected not by the common people, but by a small, elite group of military and industrial leaders who have the most to lose from a world without war, sickness, or scarcity. The story paints a damning portrait of human power structures. It argues that our systems are not designed for the well-being of all, but for the preservation of power and profit for a select few. The generals fear losing their relevance. The industrialists fear losing their fortunes. And so, they convince a well-meaning president to turn away from a golden age. This narrative resonates deeply with a common and growing suspicion that the people in charge do not always have our best interests at heart. It validates the feeling that humanity is being deliberately held back from its true potential by forces of greed and control. The rejection of Thor's offer is a powerful parable about our own self-sabotage. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. If a real solution to our biggest problems were presented today, would our current power structures allow it to be implemented? The story's answer is a pessimistic but compelling no. This critique of power is made all the more believable by the story's setting. The legend thrives in the shadows, and there is no greater shadow in the public imagination than that cast by the Pentagon and the clandestine world of intelligence agencies. This is the what-if factor that gives the story its sliver of plausibility. The Cold War was a period of intense secrecy, filled with covert operations, psychological warfare, and black budget projects. We now know about real, once secret government programs like MKUltra, which were just as bizarre as any science fiction plot. Because we know that governments keep profound secrets, it becomes easier to imagine that a secret like Valiant Thor could be one of them. The very nature of the Pentagon as a fortress of classified information becomes a blank canvas onto which this story can be projected. The complete lack of evidence, which a skeptic sees as proof of falsehood, is seen by the believer as proof of the cover-up's success. The story's ability to exist in this gray area, the space between what we know and what we suspect, is key to its survival. It plays on our innate curiosity and our suspicion that we are not being told the whole truth about the world. It feels like it could be true, and in the world of unexplained phenomena, that feeling is often enough to keep a legend alive. Ultimately, whether you see him as a historical figure or a fictional character, the story of Valiant Thor serves a final, important function. It acts as a test of belief. It pushes us to the very edge of what we consider possible and forces us to confront our own worldview. To believe in the story, you must be willing to set aside our current understanding of physics, biology, and history. You must be willing to accept the existence of vast, perfectly executed conspiracies. You must, in essence, take a leap of faith. To dismiss the story, you must accept that a compelling, detailed, and emotionally resonant narrative can be created from human imagination alone, and that it can be mistaken by many for historical fact. You must place your faith in the scientific consensus and the principles of logical deduction. Either path requires a choice, and this is where the true legacy of Valiant Thor lies. He is more than just an alleged alien. He is a thought experiment. He is a cultural Rorschach test. What you see in his story tells you as much about your own beliefs, hopes, and fears as it does about the alleged events. He reflects our deepest desire for salvation and our darkest suspicions about power. He represents our hope for a peaceful future and our fear that we are our own worst enemy. The story holds up a mirror and asks us, what kind of universe do you choose to live in? One of pure, rational materialism, or one where wonders are possible, where emissaries from the stars might just walk among us, waiting for us to be ready to listen? The mystery of Valiant Thor endures not because we have the answers, but because the questions it forces us to ask are about the most fundamental subjects of all: humanity's past, its future, and its ultimate place in the cosmos. Valiant Thor allegedly departed Earth on March 16, 1960, exactly 3 years after he arrived, his mission a noble failure. He left behind a world still teetering on the brink, and a legend that would grow in the shadows for decades. So who was he? Was he a real being from Venus, a compassionate witness to our self-destructive folly? Was he a clever psychological warfare operation, a myth created for unknown purposes? Or was he simply a story, a modern parable for the atomic age, born from the imagination of Dr. Frank Strange? The file on Valiant Thor remains open. There are no easy answers, only tantalizing clues and haunting questions. But perhaps the most important question he leaves us with is not, did he exist? But, if he did, have we changed enough to listen this time? The truth, as they say, may not just be out there. It may have already been here, walking the halls of power, and we simply chose not to see it. Thanks for exploring history's mysteries with Ancient Relics Keeper. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What secret should we unravel next? Stay curious and see you soon.